Hello and welcome to the big picture. After weeks of speculation and some very disturbing accusations from a BJP MP, RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan has expressed his wish not to seek a second term. He has decided to go back to academics in the United States. Meanwhile, his decision, which he announced on Saturday, has been received with disappointment and even distress among a large section, including the industry and corporates. Rajan, who came with impeccable credentials, has in a letter to the RBI staff on Saturday spelt out what he had sought to achieve when he took over in 2013 and how the RBI in these 3 years have achieved all of them, including controlling inflation among others. It is evident from his letter that he was willing to continue in the post. However, why did he decide to announce that he will be going back to academia? What are his contributions and the legacy he will be leaving behind when he finishes his term in early September? Why did the government decide to let him go? What will be the challenges his successors will face? We will discuss all this today with Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India and former Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations. Ajay will be joining us soon. Professor Praveen of Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU. Subhomoy Bhattacharya, Consulting Editor, Business Standard. And on the phone line from Kota is Renu, Kohli, former staff member, RBI and IMF. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Desai, what impact has Rajan made in these 3 years?
I would say the one thing that he will probably be remembered for, hopefully if it continues, is the cleaning up of the books of the public sector banks. I think that was overdue, and what this asset AQR, the asset quality review that he has started, is I think a very wise thing, and I hope this continues.
And if you
were to ask me one thing, I would say this is the one.
Sir, 1 second. Do you attribute that entirely to him?
I would say that yes, that pressure, that was truly the big reform in the system. The interest rate bit, every RBI governor has had differences of opinion with FMs on interest rates. This is nothing new about it. I have a slightly more skeptical view about the role of interest rates than maybe other people have. But in terms of impact, and I think he did it because he was not part of the old system. And I think this is going to be perhaps his greatest and most useful legacy.
But it's an unfulfilled task.
It's an unfulfilled task. That is why I think there's a clear hint in his letter that he would probably have liked to stay at least for a couple of years in order to complete this task. Remember, he has given March 2017 as the deadline for the banks for this cleanup. And I think you will see the advantages of that fairly soon. You just take one simple thing, that it is absurd that the public sector banks, which account for 70-odd% of lending, have a total market capitalization which is almost the same as the market capitalization of one private sector bank, HDFC, 300,000 crores both, roughly. Well, the public sector banks are somewhat larger, but not much larger than that. Now, why is this? Why is it that I have private sector banks which, at least in terms of market perceptions, are doing well, have a market capitalization between them, which is about about 2.5 times the market capitalization of all the public sector banks taken together. So I'd say that if he does this, then truly we will be able to get value from the phenomenal amount of capacity that you do have in public sector banks.
Okay, Renu, you there?
Yes.
Okay, Renu, how do you see this whole episode which has happened? Mr. Desai has pointed out what is the most important contribution. Would you agree with that first? And why do you think he had to quit?
Well, to answer your first question first, I do agree with Mr. Desai. Let me just qualify from my perspective what his, what sets him apart in the Indian context. And I think, in my view, what sets him apart is he had a very clear idea and the roadmap, point by point, as to what aspects of the financial sector he wanted to reform and how. The second thing is the more rapid pace of reform than what has otherwise happened in the Indian economy since 1991. I think that's quite marked. The pace of progress or rapidity is far more far faster than what we've seen. We've seen a very gradualistic approach to reform otherwise. So I think in that I would like to add that to what Mr. Desai already said. I agree with him about the cleanup of the banking system, and that I also think that inflation targeting itself is also another big structural change, in the sense that both government and RBI are now in agreement as to what is the primary goal of the Reserve Bank and how it shall go about it, and what will be the target. And that is something which will survive Dr. Rajan. It lives on after him. So whatever the future governor might be, whoever it might be, I don't think that it's going to be easy to deviate from that without causing a severe damage to credibility. So that's something, that's a lasting reform which I think will be, which is irreversible. There can be differences in the way or methods or the course that the cleanup of the banking system may take ahead. We do not know, because that's very, very much a work in progress. To answer your second question as to how things have panned out, if I remember, that was the question, right?
Right.
Well, I think
my question was,
things,
why do you think he had to take this decision not to seek a second term, or no?
I think he said that in his letter. In a sense, it's quite implicit as to the statement or what has been issued. It's quite implicit. I mean, he's made it clear that he was very much open to the idea of continuing, but obviously there wasn't agreement enough or sufficient advance clarification or I think that's what is evident. Of course, there are many interpretations that one is reading in the media, so I don't want to get into that speculative aspect.
Okay.
But yes, given the enormous amount of controversy, I guess it probably became a kind of a writing on the wall in a sense for any individual. It could have been that way.
Okay. Praveen, how do you look at this?
I completely agree with what Mr. Desai said as regards his contribution in terms of starting a process. But then I think it's just the beginning. I don't think what he has put in place is something which is very robust and so on as yet, partly because, you see, fundamentally, Mr. Rajan also is deeply steeped into a worldview which is connected with the global finance and so on, and which creates the problem of you do not quite know where to draw the line in terms of regulation, which would be necessary.
He was seen as somebody who robustly encouraged capitalism, but he was robustly also discouraging crony capitalism.
Exactly, but that is exactly my point, in the sense that, you see, this is something which is like a razor's edge. Where exactly do you draw the line in terms of regulating the system, doing things for the system? Because if you try and make sense of many of his statements in the last even 3 months, you want to do it, but you don't quite know how far you should go. But as regards, this AQR and the rest of it, which he did, were certainly very commendable. And I'm in fact surprised that in his letter he does not mention these or this whole restructuring, etc., as the major achievement. The major achievements cited, the 3 major achievements cited are, other things. First of these, in my judgment, is actually completely wishy-washy, this whole business of inflation management and so on. There is certainly some credit which can be given to him as regards bolstering foreign exchange reserves. And the third, which is this transparent licensing of new banks, etc., there I would possibly think he deserves more than, let's say, any other preceding RBI governor in the last 20 years. Right? But again, one has to analyze what are the major advantages of it and the downside of it. But in terms of what Mr. Desai pointed out, I completely agree with him that is a significant contribution.
Okay. We're now joined in by Mr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary in the Ministry of Industry and Commerce in the Government of India. Mr. Dua, so Rajan's continuation, how do you think, because there has been a lot of statements being made. People have expressed their opinions in the last couple of days that since this happened, that some people are even seeing him going as some kind of a great loss to the RBI, to the nation. Do you see it like that?
I think he'll be missed. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And I say this from two different perspectives. One, he brought about in the minds of global bankers, central bankers around the world, he gave them a degree of confidence about the way the Indian central bank was heading or what kind of direction it was taking. Alongside, and this was happening at a time when there is considerable volatility in the global markets. He represented, given his past background, association with the global banking system and his other assignments in the US, etc., a face of a person who is independent, transparent, and able to have his own, and whatever he came to his mind, he certainly expressed, and a lot of people like that kind of an approach. Second, I would say the number of steps which he initiated, most of them are still work in progress.
Right.
He certainly was on the right track. He probably needed much more time. And that's where I'm coming to, saying, should we be looking at a 3-year tenure for a RBI governor, or should it be longer, at least 5 years or so? Maybe during that period, he would have been able to complete a number of steps which he had initiated.
Okay.
Can I just mention one quickly?
No,
I think on the first point,
last 3 governors of the Reserve Bank of India have had 5 years of tenure.
Yeah, but can I just mention quickly on the first point that you mentioned about the global standing? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think wasn't he named as a vice chairman of the financial state? I think it was named.
Yes.
I think the first time that somebody from a developing country has been placed in that very important position in the global financial system. Now, I don't think any of the others would have made it.
So the kind of high credibility that he enjoys globally, that
because of his work in RBI, not just because he was a very good academic. It is because of the respect that his work in the RBI commanded that he was asked to become, the vice chair of that Financial Stability Forum.
So, okay, Subhomoy, it is said during these last 3 years, or at least in the last 1 year or so, we have been hearing about his scraps, if you can call it that, with the finance ministry. They wanted interest rates to be brought down. He kept, how do you see that aspect? There's certain criticism about him that because of his tough stance as far as the interest rates were concerned, more interested in controlling inflation, he has, it has led to growth getting affected.
Girish, I don't think, as Dr. Desai has pointed out, incidentally, we are on the same page in the newspaper. So we would have the same point of view, but...
it's a very independent paper. It doesn't tell us what to say.
So as I would say that he is not the first governor who's had difference with the finance minister. Relations with Dr. Reddy and Mr. Chidambaram became extremely acerbic towards the end.
Right.
And I remember as the chief economic advisor, Mr. Dr. Ashok Lahiri had issued a very disappointed looking statement on 2 occasions. And on one occasion, the finance minister refused to give a statement after the governor's comment. So differences on inflation targeting, on interest rate position is part of, it comes with the turf. So I don't think that is the problem. The problem comes with the fact that Rajan's tough call on interest rate comes at a time when there are no independent, push factors or pull factors for the economy to really grow. So the export sector is languishing, and the biggest problem here is a sector called the small and medium enterprises. This sector is a politically very, very strong sector. And this is also the sector which gets hit naturally when the domestic interest rate stays tough. They were also hit by the banking reforms which Dr. Rajan had started. The banks had become cautious. The net result of it is that the small and medium enterprises were actually locked out of the credit cycle. Once that happened, the clamor from the political circles for something to be done became strong. And that, I think, is the tipping point in this entire episode. That what takes precedence? Do we wait for the banks to turn healthy so that they can take on the load of additional credit? Or do we stay with the current credit rate, which is almost, in fact, it's less than 5% right now? That is a position, and that affects basically the medium enterprises. The largest enterprises.
That led to the differences.
Yeah, because the largest enterprises do not borrow from within the country. They go abroad. They have the possibilities to go abroad. But it's the medium enterprises which borrow, and they also remember are the face of jobs.
Would you agree with that?
I would say that to a certain extent it is true, and I would say that this is, and I would add one more sector, the real estate sector.
The real estate sector.
These two were the ones who were feeling the pinch, and they are certainly politically powerful. But it seems to me that if you look at the numbers of our public sector banking system, it would have been very difficult for them to open up in this area unless they're cleaned up their books on the big loans that they gave. Incidentally, on the interest rates, remember.
So he was on the right track.
Yes, and I would entirely agree that what he is saying, that basically, really, the people who need the public, particularly the public sector banking system most, are the smaller borrowers, not the big borrowers. But the problem was that the balance sheets of these banks had been completely messed up by the you look at the numbers in
No, but sir, it's very interesting that the public sector banks' balance sheets were messed up by big corporates.
Yes.
And the small and medium industry were suffering because
absolutely.
of that.
You look at the steel and iron ore sector, you look at the coal sector, you look at the exposure. That 2010-11, when we started the financial stimulus, and people were allowed to borrow from banks as if there's no tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And that is where the problem really came along.
Okay. Renu, do you agree with this? Is this the line?
No, only partly. I agree with the fact that there has been a lot of resentment from the over-indebted corporate sector and those ones for whom the price of credit has been very high. But I think that for the angst or the anger to devolve completely upon the RBI governor is missing the point altogether. Because let us not forget, it is the government which has mandated the RBI that price stability shall be your primary goal. It is the government and the RBI which jointly signed an inflation agreement in February 2015. And it is the government which has mandated the RBI to pursue a target. Now, what is the tool that the RBI has at its disposal? And in this instance, the RBI governor. Everybody was aware of this. The government of India and both the RBI are equal partners in this reform venture of inflation targeting. So where is the question of there being a difference between the government and RBI on this issue? Once you have a target, it is very clear that what is the inflation forecast and where the interest rates in which direction and where they are going to be moving and being set. So I think that in my view, I would defer that for the entire resentment or, the RBI governor being made the fall guy is not entirely correct because both are on one page. I can understand and I do concede that the industry and those who are suffering, for whom the debt servicing costs have become higher, etc., there is, of course, squeeze and that resentment. There's another contribution of Dr. Rajan that I would like to highlight over here, which is that in this entire tenure in the last 2.5 years, on behalf of all emerging market economies, as also India, he is the one governor who has spoken consistently and pressed and argued for more open discussion and on the spillover effects of unconventional monetary policies upon the emerging market economies, calling for evolution of the rules of the game, including at the IMFC, at the G20. So that's another contribution of his that I would wish to highlight.
Okay, yes, you wanted to say something.
I'm not saying that it's that RBI should have been blamed or not. What I am pointing out is that is the reason why matters have come to a head. I agree with Renu that it shouldn't have happened that way.
I'll come to you, sir. Yes, you wanted to say something.
No, I think basically, let me just say this, that nobody is blaming the RBI for this. And in fact, I personally believe what he was doing was the right thing. He was first clean up the books of and then if you have a healthy banking system.
And as far as Renu is saying that the government is also on the same page as far as that is concerned.
See, the problem is the government may be on the same page, but whether the government is on the same page as some of their supporters, I don't know. Maybe what we need is a conversation between Mr. Jaitley and Mr. Subramanian Swamy.
On this, can I just make one point? You see, if you, September 2015, Rajan and Subramaniam were speaking in two completely different languages. It was completely, contradictory to each other. I mean, Subramaniam is saying that, look, we are in a deflation territory. In fact, I'm quoting him. Why is it that the rates are not being brought down and so on and so forth? Now, so at that point in time, in spite of the fact that in February 2015, there was this sort of MOU between Finance Ministry and RBI, nonetheless, there were two very different points of views, right? So it's not only some of the political functionaries that we are talking about. The technical experts were having very different perceptions of the existing situation, very different assessments of how to move forward and so on. I think we need to keep that in mind.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Dua.
I think this issue of cleaning up the banks and that was the cause for difference probably arose a bit later. The earlier one, I think the differences were more on the issue of setting the interest rates.
That has been a constant problem.
Yes, till such time as this agreement was done, the two seemed to be going in different directions. That here was Dr. Rajan trying to protect as much the depositors as the borrowers.
Right.
Because he always talked of...
He mentions that in his letter.
Yes, he always talked of a need for a difference of 150 to 200 basis points between the cost of deposit and the cost of borrowing. But having said that, I think what really has tipped the scale is last 1 year, a few comments by him which were treated probably as over-frank. If you would recall that he's commented about tolerance, extent of, he's commented about make in India, or is it, for India kind of a thing. And those frank comments probably have, I would say brutally frank in some cases, have probably, I also remember he's talking about the GDP estimates and the way the GDP has been calculated, etc., the revised estimates. Those have probably not gone down well with powers that be in the end.
Okay. But the kind of allegations against him about him not working in favor of the Indian economic system, working against the economic system, or things like that.
I can only describe that as errant nonsense. He was a person whose contribution will be appreciated as we move down if they continue with this cleanup. Because frankly, our public sector banking system was on the verge of a major crisis. Let's be very clear.
Yes.
And I think he has probably stopped that. And I think there's also the broader vision of the operations of the financial system, etc., which he brought in. I'm focused on AQR, but there are other things also that he did which were very important. So I would say that, well, he is going. I hope that the new person who comes in, man or woman, will continue A, with the restructuring of the banking system, B, with the new system of the Monetary Policy Committee coming in. It's a big challenge. That's a big challenge.
I think that is one thing which he seems to be a little disappointed about, that he's not able to fulfill that task of setting up the Monetary Policy Committee. Yes, it would have been
very useful if a person like him had been around to stabilize that operation. But I hope that fortunately the names that are being thrown around these days, all of them are people with competence, and they all happen to be friends of mine, so don't ask me to choose. I'm not going to open my mouth on who's the best or anything.
This is friendly with everybody.
They all happen to be friends. So, it's not...
Sir, Praveen, if you have to put a finger on one contribution of his which has made a positive impact on the economy, what would you say?
I would certainly go along with what was flagged right at the outset, that is trying to do things with the banking system, public sector banking in particular, and his attempt to rein in crony capitalism, although I think hell of a lot needs to be done there. It's just first few fumbling steps, I would say, but certainly it's significant.
Has that cost him the job?
I think I would agree with Mr. Dua on this, that he possibly was riling the government a bit too much when, for instance, he talks of India being the one-eyed in the company of the blind and so on. You know, when there's so much of tom-tomming about how India is the fastest growing economy, etc., and Raghuram Rajan as Governor RBI says this, and on many other things. I mean, the sort of things that he said.
Renu, very quickly, you think that he overstepped?
I think I would just like to say that at a deeper level, on the surface it may appear so, but at a deeper level, perhaps, it's more in the nature of a question mark, which is that if you are engaging or triggering structural changes in many dimensions at a rapid pace, is it that the system, there is a backlash from within the system itself? That's, and is this a part of that? Maybe. We don't know. Time will tell us.
Time will tell us. These are important points he makes.
Yeah, time will tell. The other thing which we haven't mentioned so far is the major changes which are coming about in the payment systems.
Exactly.
The payments. This is going to be very big. This will really help the small players. If you have this universal payments interface that is being talked of,
Bharat
the
bill payment system, and he talks about trade receivable exchanges.
And I wish that he had stayed to see some of these things through, because he has a depth of understanding of what constitutes stability in financial markets, which is very important when you're making big changes.
That's why I said that he basically is a finance person, right? But along with that, I would also say that he was deeply steeped into a worldview which is monetarism, which has serious limitations.
Mr. Dua?
I think his biggest contribution was conveying or communicating to the world about India's macroeconomic stability, and we saw the results of it between August 2013 when he came into office and and till now. We've seen 30 odd billion dollars worth of equity coming into the country, and about $29 billion.
You attribute you attribute it to him, to his credibility?
I partly yes, but as I'm saying, it was the communicating the macroeconomic stability managed by a competent professional banker, the central banker, which went down well with the FPIs and other investors in India.
Subhomoy, challenge for his success. The biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge is to establish communication with the government. Most RBI governors have had limited performance period despite their 5-year term, because of the fact that there's been a quite considerable amount of time they have been sparring with the government. Rajan has not proved to be an exception to that. And that, I think, India cannot afford anymore.
Mr. Desai, would you agree with that?
I would say...
What is the biggest challenge?
No, I think the biggest challenge is going to be to stabilize the relationship between RBI and the government. It is true that the RBI head is an appointed gentleman. He is not an elected gentleman. And it is possible that we may now have to look at some way of appointing a head of RBI which is more akin to the systems that we follow for some of the constitutional positions.
Okay.
So that there is a broader consensus around.
I think that's
incidentally, remember,
that's a separate discussion actually.
Incidentally, remember that the Federal Reserve head is very powerful,
yes,
but he is answerable.
Yes, exactly.
He or she, now it's a she, has to appear and explain the judgments before the Parliament.
I think you have flagged out an issue which needs further discussion, but all of you seem to agree that Raghuram Rajan has done good for this country and for the RBI. We'll wait and watch who his successor will be and what he will be faced with and how he'll cope with it. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture same time.